Week ago, I guess it was a week ago Friday, this gentleman joined me during the 8 o'clock hour, Scott Allen Curley. And as I talked to him, I felt that his story needed more time to really understand the triumph of this guy's life. And I also, we don't take phone calls in the 8 o'clock hour because the guests are only with us for 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes at most. And so I asked him to come back. And he's joining us again tonight. Scott, welcome back to Nightside. It seems like it's just only a few days ago we had you here, but tonight we got a little bit more opportunity to let your story breathe a little bit. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you having me tonight.
Well, your story is just one of those amazing stories of success. So let's start at the beginning. You spent nearly a decade behind bars. How did you get on that? What were your circumstances that led to you making, I assume, what now in retrospect you recognize were some poor decisions?
Very poor decisions. Well, so since we have a little bit more time to chat, I'll give you a little bit more expanded version so that we can, it can have more context. I was raised in a very dysfunctional family, and it was all about the exterior. It was all about the image. And so I spent my entire childhood trying to mold myself into being what I thought others wanted me to be, as opposed to really embracing who I really was. And I got so good at that I lost myself in that facade, per se. And just the struggle between those two dynamics was pulling at me so hard. And it was something that I kept very secret. I kept it to myself. Even my closest of friends were unaware of the turmoil. And as time went on, and when I got closer to graduating, I felt myself getting more and more tensed up, meaning that I felt like something was about to happen inside of me, but I didn't share that with anyone. And then I started hanging out with, quote unquote, the wrong crowd, which was pretty much all that I needed.
Sure,
And I say that tongue in cheek. And eventually things just began to implode. And
where'd you grow up, Scott? Whereabouts you grow up?
I grew up in a little town called Crosby, Texas, just outside of Houston, northeast of Houston. The first part of my early life was in Baytown, Texas, and from there we moved to Crosby, which is just maybe 20 minutes north of that, and that's where I spent the majority of my childhood.
Okay. Again, I don't want to ask questions that are too personal, but was your family situation tough, or did your mom and dad, were they supportive, or did you come out of a family, a family set of circumstances that we might characterize, or a psychiatrist might characterize as dysfunctional?
It was the epitome of dysfunction, no question about it.
Well, you go right to the point. That's what I like about you. I'm trying to ask questions as kindly and as gently as I can here.
I'll tell you, you don't have to. We can be brutally honest. I wrote the book, Absolution, The Dark Path to Light, to actually expose all of those secrets. And I did that, for the sake of freeing myself and also helping others to understand that they can do the same as well.
So you look like a pretty young guy to me. So I'm guessing you were born sometime in the 80s?
I was born in 1967, and I appreciate that compliment.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
You're on the right side of 50. That's good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, so you did you have a big family growing up, or was it a small group?
No, it was very small, actually. I was only child. I was adopted into the Curley family, and I will not say my parents, my adoptive parents, they were not bad people.
Yep.
I'll say that. The problem and the challenge that they faced is that they just did not have the training, understanding, or history or experience to know how to raise a child properly. Right. And there's something that I learned, that we can only give as much as we have to give. And unfortunately, they just didn't have the parenting skills. They weren't given a lot as when they with the way that they were raised,
Sure.
and so
Were they
young
parents, Scott?
They were average age parents. My mother was 29 when I was born, and my father would have been 34 when I was born. But they didn't adopt me until I was 2 years old.
Really average. Average age. It wasn't like you had a teenage mom or something like that. Okay.
No, not at all.
So, was there a point in time when you think things kind of went off the rails? And I'm wondering if you're able to isolate that moment.
Yes, and like I said, this is the whole point of us chatting, and as I did in my book, it's brutal honesty, because the only way that we can free ourselves and do better is if we put aside the facades.
Okay.
And so during our talk tonight, I'll share some pretty, I'll be respectful about it, but I will absolutely tell you the truth. Growing up in my family was very difficult, because my parents were more concerned about the image as opposed to building growing and nurturing the family itself.
Okay.
It was all about how we appeared to the Joneses. On the outside, we looked like the absolute perfect family. We were an African-American family where my father was very well respected in the community. We ended it when I was 9 years old. We moved to a neighborhood called Newport that was predominantly a upper middle class white neighborhood, and we were one of only maybe 4 black families in it. And my father was determined to kind of be a step above everyone else. Had a little bit nicer car than everyone had. The yard of the month very often.
Okay.
I was pretty much their trophy child. I hate to say, but it's a fact. And so I was raised believing that I had to earn love and validation. I was not taught that it was something that I had a right to just by being a human being, per se.
Let me ask you this: how did you figure all of this out? And I know I'm jumping ahead of the story here, but
go ahead.
How did you figure all? And when we get back from the break, we'll get into the story of how the roller coaster started and how you went down and what you ended up with. But you've kind of figured this out. You've taken the time to figure out what happened. Did you meet people in prison, or were there professionals in prison who helped you work this through? How did you figure this out?
Yes, that's a very good question. The fact is, I was blessed to be sent to prison. I was in and out of jail and prison between 88 and 91, probably 40 times. I was probably in jail 30 to 40 times within a 3-year period. I would come out on a little short break and go right back in for something else.
Yeah.
But what we
would call a frequent flyer.
And I actually got categorized the last time I got sentenced for a nonviolent offense, which was for auto theft, to 35 years in prison, because I was categorized at the age of 22, a habitual criminal at 22 years old.
Yeah.
And at that point, I got sentenced to 35 years, which was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me, because I was forced to take a real look at myself. And that was the point where I realized that no matter how well I could talk myself out of things, I wasn't going to be able to talk myself and wiggle myself out of this one. I had to deal with it.
And the Texas court system in the late 80s, early 90s was not a sort of kumbaya feel-good experience, I assume.
No, I was down there in the old school, and I got sent to I was on some of the toughest units in Texas. They called one of them Ferguson, the gladiator unit, where you had to be able to take care of yourself to survive down there. But like I said, in hindsight, it may sound very bizarre to say that it was the best thing that ever could have happened to me, because to your point and to your question, I had to go through a program that was called IPTC. It stands for In Prison Therapeutic Community. Yep. And it was the most intense, most rugged, most involved program I'd ever heard of and ever known to be in existence. And a lot of folks couldn't make it through it. It was 7 days a week, 12 hours a day for a full year. Whoa. And thank God for that program. That program gave me the opportunity to have a life, a real life, and taught me how to manage my behavior and my feelings. And a big reason that many of us get in trouble is that we have a hard time managing our feelings. So it really helps with that.
My guest is Scott Allen Curley. He's written a book called Absolution, The Dark Path to Light. I know that there are people out there who listen to my show, Scott, who are now behind bars.
Yes.
I get letters from men and women behind bars all the time. In my own career, as I think we mentioned the other night, I had worked on behalf of men who I came to believe were wrongfully imprisoned for a murder they had nothing to do with. And I have, I'm a lawyer by training and also by practice. And so I'm always fascinated when someone like you can literally scrape the bottom of the barrel and somehow get up and get back and restore your independence, your identity, and your integrity, because it's a tough place to get out of once you get in. I remember as a 18, 19-year-old young kid playing baseball, we went in to play a prison team, and the guy that pitched against us that day had been signed by the old Washington Senators. And so I went out of my way to meet him after the game. His name was Lefty Gilday. And I said to him, I was a 19-year-old kid, and I said, you can get out, Lefty. You were not a major league player, but you were a bonus baby. You made some money, and you're an athlete, and you're a good pitcher. And he was 35 years old at the time, and I'm a 19-year-old kid. You can get out and become a coach or something. And he looked at me and he said, kid, when I get out, I'm going to get drunk and rob a bank. And guess what? I was at basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey in 1970, and he was out. He robbed a bank, and he shot a police officer during that bank robbery and killed an officer named Schroeder, Walter Schroeder.
Wow,
Spent the rest of his life in prison. And when I was working, believe it or not, to show you how people function, when I was working, now this is probably at least, I'm trying to time it here, at least 25 years later, I walked into the prison to interview one of the men I was helping to, who I believed in. I was trying to get him out of prison. And Lefty was sitting over in the corner, and he didn't look hardly anything like I remembered him. He was a thin left-handed pitcher. His weight had blown up, and he looked at me and he said, I struck you out twice. And I said, no, Lefty, you're lying. You never struck me out. And it's just amazing how the people who find themselves in that situation, it's like I wanted to be kind to him, but it was like, no, Lefty, you didn't strike me out. You couldn't break a pane of glass. I mean, you were a good pitcher, don't get me wrong. Anyway, I'm fascinated by people who find themselves in prison. The man who I work for to get out of prison, he said to me at one point, he said, how do you feel knowing that you had nothing to do with this crime, that you're truly an innocent person? You're not like some of the folks in prison who always want to say they're innocent, but they're really not. And he said to me, I know the circumstance I'm in. I have to do the time. I can't let the time do me. That was his phrase.
That's right.
And I'll bet you can identify with that phrase. Let's take a break, Scott. I'm going to invite people to call. I don't know if they want to call or they want to listen to us, but I hope some want to call. And first of all, congratulate you on the amazing experience that you have somehow endured and overcome. 617-254-1030, 617-931-1030. I also have told you, Scott, I have lots of people listening in different places around the country, and whenever I say that, all the calls come in from the New England area. If you're inspired by this story, this is a gentleman who has gone through a lot, and I hope you buy his book. I hope to get it myself. Absolution: The Dark Path to Light. Where do you hear the rest of the story? He is now a self-made millionaire, a successful businessman. So this is a guy who not just got out of prison and is like living life day to day. He has taken life and overcome obstacles that you and I never would have ever experienced. Back on Nightside with Scott Allen Curley. the book Absolution, The Dark Path to Light, right after this.
Now back to Dan Ray, live from the Window World Nightside Studios on WBZ News Radio.
My guest is Scott Allen Curley. Scott, here's one final comment on my time playing. We played inside of what was called Walpole State Prison, which was the toughest prison in Massachusetts. Okay. And earlier that summer, they had a riot inside the prison. So we were supposed to play in July, and we ended up playing in September. So at one time, up at bat against lefty, he plunked me on my left elbow. Okay.
Oh no!
Got hit by pitch. It didn't hurt because he didn't throw that hard. So I get down to first base. I'm like, again, 19-year-old kid. So the first baseman, I kind of complained to him. I said, man, so I was trying to play tough kid, right? Which of course is a big mistake. So I said to the first baseman, big guy. I said, hey, man, where'd you get this guy? I said, he can't throw hard and he has no control. The guy turned to me and he says, hey, look, punk. He said, if you'd spent the last 6 weeks in solitary confinement, your control wouldn't be any good either. It was true. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So you talk about this program. I'm wondering if there's anybody within that program, because I'm a big believer in that all of us have mentors in life, and that at some point along the line, people come along who can change our lives. Was it just the program, or was there someone in the program that helped you open your eyes?
Well, the program was the people. That's one thing. And there's one thing that stuck with me and will stick with me for the rest of my life, that when I really understood this and internalized this fact, it gave me a completely different perspective on life. And I'll share it with you and the listeners now.
Right.
They taught us that we all make mistakes, but none of us is a mistake. And so often in life, and I've done it, I did it my entire childhood, I equated myself with my mistakes. And when we do that, so oftentimes we feel less than and unworthy and like we have no value, and we don't feel like we're deserving of good, wonderful blessings and good things, and we tend to act accordingly. And so when I was taught that, yes, we make mistakes. We sometimes make really big mistakes, but it doesn't mean that we are a mistake. Then when I really grasped that concept, that was the beginning of my transition, my mindset shift into a totally different direction.
That was a distinction with a very clear difference. Oftentimes we use the phrase distinction without a difference. Boy, yes. If you were able to absorb that thought, how did you deal with the long nights in prison? I mean, I would think that the worst part of the day is when you're in your cell, locked down for the night, and you're alone with your thoughts.
That's when we start. That's when I really did the most of my reflecting, and I realized the value of time, and I made it a point to not waste my time, even though I was in prison. So what I really tried to do, and I feel that it really helped me, was I tried to educate myself as much as I could while I was in prison. 10 years is a long time. I didn't do it all in one stretch. I did it over 4 different times, but still 10 years is 10 years. But during that time, I read over 1,000 books. I went through college programs. I did everything I could to be in it, but not of it, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
I made it a point to not get involved in any gangs. There's so much temptation down there to get caught up in that penitentiary mentality and that penitentiary lifestyle. And the way I carried myself was not the coolest. I didn't talk the slick, hip, and cool slang that is known within the system. I just made a conscious decision to use that time to prepare myself for when I got out, because I did believe that I would get out one day.
So how tough was it to be in that milieu, in that set of circumstances, where a lot of people will say, hey, in order to get along, you got to go along, because you're living in a different society. How tough was it to have not only the backbone, but the courage to deal with that system? Because I'm sure that there were people who either wanted to recruit you to a gang And when you resisted, they probably wanted to teach you a lesson of why you should be a member of a gang. Am I right or wrong on that?
You're right, and I'm going to give away a part of my book. It's funny and it's embarrassing, but I will share this.
Okay.
So one thing that you cannot do in prison, and if you want to survive, is to not stand up for yourself. And I'll be the first to admit, when I was down there in my early 20s, I'm a light-skinned guy. I had real curly hair. They considered me a quote-unquote pretty boy, which I had. All that works against you in prison. It works well with the girls when I was, out, but it didn't work so well in prison, right?
Yeah. Bubba wanted you as a roommate is what you're telling me.
Right, yeah. So, and I had a fear of losing my teeth. There are a lot of people in prison who have missing teeth, and they don't have the dentist. They don't replace them. They don't give you false teeth. And I was absolutely determined to not put myself in a position where I got my teeth knocked out or something like that. So here's the funny story. I'll give it to you super quick. Thank God, Lester Curley, my father, was tough as nails. He carried himself sort of like Malcolm X. And when I was younger, he taught me to box. He taught me to box the right way, and he would be very hard on me, and to the point where it was probably these days it might even be borderline illegal. But but I did understand the fundamentals of how to use my hands. So there was a time, and I'll give you a very short, funny story, but it's what kept me going. It kept me out of trouble, per se, as far as having to do a lot of fighting the whole time I was in prison. So I was on the unit. I just hit this really tough unit called Ferguson, and I had on some Jordans, and that's sort of like a status symbol when you were in prison back then. The only thing you have are your shoes, and if the nicer your shoes are, the more status you have amongst the other prisoners. Well, this guy approached me, and I'll be the first to admit now, as I felt then, I was scared to death. I will not lie and say that I wasn't scared. I was absolutely terrified to be in prison, especially on that unit, and I was very afraid of getting hurt. So, but I did remember what my father taught me, and this guy was approaching me, and my dad always said, if it's going to go down, it's got to go down on your terms. So the guy approached me and was in the process, I could tell, of aggressively coming at me because he was interested in my tennis shoes because he mentioned it. I overheard him. And when he approached me, I just by instinct hit him as hard as I could with my left hand. And this is nothing to boast about. It's just a funny story in hindsight. And the guy was about 260. I was about 190, but I hit him just in the right spot, knocked him out. And now, said that to say, I was scared to death because, oh, my God, I was praying to God that he would wake up and please don't die or don't be hurt because now I'm going to get even more time. I'll never get out of prison, right?
Yeah.
Thank God he got up. Everything was okay, shook it off. But that got me a nickname, and, oh, my God. Before I tell you the nickname, I'm going to tell you in prison, everybody has the cool nicknames. Pimpin' Slim, Jazzy Red, Colorado Black, Smooth, all that stuff. Well, guess what they called me? They called me Froggy. They called me Froggy because they said I jumped like a frog.
Okay.
They said, I'm like, oh my God, can I have a better nickname than Froggy? But it was actually a show of respect because they were like, don't mess with that dude. He's Froggy. He'll jump.
Yeah. So you didn't
One
sucker
time
punch
is all
the
it
guy.
took.
You didn't sucker punch the guy because a sucker punch is when the guy doesn't see it coming. He saw it coming, but you knew you'd be better to strike first.
I had to, and that was the one and only physical altercation I ever got into in the entire time I was in prison. And although I had the stupidest nickname and I could never shake it, there was a bit of respect that went with it, and that was the only issue I ever had in prison.
Word got around. He wanted your kicks, and
they say you don't mess with a scared man. They're the most dangerous.
All right. We got to take a quick news break here. My guest is Scott Allen Curley. I want to talk about your time out and what you've said, what you have done. We now know what you overcame, but I want to talk about your triumphs. And again, I would love folks, particularly folks who have spent time in the set of circumstances, and I have many listeners in that situation. Feel free to join the conversation. I think that it's very important to make people understand that if you do make a mistake, and you pay your debt to society, and you come out and you can get past that mistake, as my guest has, there's a tremendous amount of respect that should be rendered by those of us who have never known what it was like to be incarcerated. My name's Dan Ray. This is Nightside, 617-254-1030, 617-931-1030. My guest is Scott Allen Curley. His book, Absolution, The Dark Path to Life. He is 47 years old, if I'm doing my math correctly. He has spent 10 years of his life inside of tough prisons. He got off that roller coaster. He has overcome drugs, prison, sobriety, determination, relapse, homelessness, and ultimately absolution. And he is now a millionaire and an entrepreneur, a successful businessman. An incredible story. Back on Nightside.
Nightside with Dan Ray on WBZ, Boston's News Radio.
My guest is Scott Allen Curley. His book, Absolution, The Dark Path to Light. Scott, what year did you get out of prison finally? You hit the joints sometime in the late 80s. When was the day you walked out for the last time?
Last time I walked out was in 2001. I was back on a parole violation. And I do have to clarify, as much as I would like to own the age 47, I'm actually 57. I was born in 1967. So.
Okay, my math has failed me there, okay? So,
that's okay. That's okay.
Okay, well, that's good. Instead of having 25%. Okay, no, thank you for that correction.
No problem.
Let's I want to work phone callers in here, but I also want to complete the story. Let me grab a couple of calls, and we'll complete the story here. I got Jeff in Brockton. Jeff, you're first. I'm going to get you on here real quickly with Scott Allen Curley. Go right ahead.
Hey, Jeff. How are you, Jeff?
How are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
Man, I got to say congratulations. I am still on the path. I got out of prison 7 years ago, and this is the first time in my life I've ever made an effort to stay out.
Wonderful.
I work 2 jobs full time. Like I said, I'm still on the path. I've dealt with homelessness, substance abuse, parole violations. I'm tempted to do something stupid every day, and if it's I just keep my head down, keep pushing forward with work with my wife. I know what you have overcome. So big ups, man. Much respect. I haven't read your book yet. I'm just listening to Dan Ray on my ride home like I do every night. And I'm definitely going to be picking up your book, man. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Let me share just a real quick tidbit with you, because I love and appreciate that you called in, and love you, brother. I would recommend, whenever you think about doing something that's not the best, that may not be the best decision, because I think about it every day, all day as well, just apply what I call the 10-second rule. Before you do anything, just pause, breathe, and just take 10 seconds. 10 seconds before you make any sort of decision, and there's a very good chance that if you just wait 10 seconds before you make that decision that your emotions are telling you that you should make, you more than likely will not make that poor decision. Just takes 10 seconds.
I'm gonna do just that.
Hey, Jeff,
yes,
thank you for being a loyal Nightside listener. Congratulations to you. You're in the midst of a fight. You're gonna overcome it.
Absolutely.
And if I can ever
The
be of any help to
discrimination
you,
is
give me a
real out
call.
here for anybody with a criminal record.
I'm sorry, I could not hear that.
I said the discrimination is real out here for anybody with a criminal record.
It is. That just means we have to fight a little harder. That's all.
Yeah. I got lucky. Yeah. A guy gave me a chance, and I'm making the best of it. He knows my whole story.
Keep it up, man. Very proud of you.
Thank you. Congratulations. Stay out.
Right back at you, Jeff.
Sir.
Congratulations. Thanks
Dan.
for being a Nightside listener. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
That's a guy who's listening every night. Let me go to Marty in Florida, in St. Augustine, Florida. Marty, you're on with my guest, Scott Allen Curley. Scott, I will tell you, this is a former police officer, former New York City police officer, but I suspect he's
I gotta go. Time's up.
No. Hey, go ahead, Marty.
I went on in 1970. I got promoted to sergeant in 1985. I retired in 1990. Let me just tell you something. First
Yes,
of
sir.
all, like a friend of mine in Long Island who was mentoring a felon. And at certain point, he had an argument with his girlfriend, and he tried to choke her. And they made a new law in New York called criminal strangulation, which is a felony. So
Yes,
this
sir.
guy became a felon, and he's the nicest guy in the world. And when I go to New York to visit him, I say, his name is Michael. I say, Mike, you're a felon, but you're not a crook, okay? That's number one. Number two, Martha Stewart is a felon, and I couldn't afford to live next to her for, what do you call it, insider trading, okay? Number three, a few years ago in Florida, they had Proposition 4, where they want to give felons, except if you're a sexual violator or murderer, they want to give you back the right to vote. I voted yes. The Republican Party said vote no. And now felons can just walk in and vote as long as they are paid up all their dues, whatever. Okay? And I do agree. The one thing I don't like is, and this has nothing to do with the felons, but when you come out of prison or whatever, you're a felon, it's like you might as well be dead because it's supposedly hard to get a job. And that's, I think that there are a lot of people out there, goody-goodies, who I hate. I love felons and I love homeless people. My next door neighbor was a skinhead in California. He did 8 years in prison, shot up a bar, and now he's working in a local his only problem is he's a drinker, but he's working in a local hospital. He's very proud of his job, and his family has a key to my house. So I tell people, felon doesn't mean a crook, all right? And
we appreciate that.
When I was in New York during the before I retired, a life sentence in New York was usually about 8 years, and that's ridiculous. But I've met people in the street who said, well, I served time for manslaughter. I killed an FBI agent. I don't like when people brag, but I totally support your guest, and I want to thank him and everybody out there. I'm going to tell you right now, I would hire a felon in a minute, but I don't like to hire drunks. So if you know somebody that's a felon, give the guy a break because he's trying to make something out of himself.
All right, Marty. Thank you, man. We'll talk soon, okay? Thanks.
Love your show.
Thank you, Marty.
By the way, you can tell from Marty he's a New Yorker. He's got that classic New York accent. Let me go to Sherry.
I love it.
Let me go to Sherry in Houston, Texas. Sherry, I suspect that you may be a friend of our guest. If you're a regular listener to Nightside, welcome. Either way, go right ahead, Sherry.
This is my first time. Hi, Scott. It's your classmate, Sherry Morgan. And,
Sherry, hey.
And I just wanted to call in. I know me and some of our other classmates are listening, but I wanted to call in. And personally, I just want to tell you, Scott, we went to school together. We did. We've been through a lot. We've probably seen each other at our worst, our best. We've all gone through things. And since graduating from high school, all of us, we've all gone in different directions. And the truth is we all have a story. I have your book, and the truth is I've read just a couple of pages. I haven't read all of it. And I'm going to. But I just want to let you know that in spite of all that you've been through, I'm proud of you because it's like you say, turn lemons into lemonade. That's what you've done. I looked at you at our last class reunion, and I thought, just the things that you've accomplished. You didn't let the things get the best of you, and even when you were down. But look where you are now, and I'm just thankful to God that you are doing great things, and I pray that you continue to do great things and just reaching out, telling your story, helping other people. But as your classmate, I'm proud of you. So
thank you so much, Sherry, and I love you, and I'm proud to call you my friend. I have to say something real quick about Sherry. So I'm going to go ahead and put her out there since she called. Sherry was my friend in school that she didn't know it, but she lit up my day almost every day because Sherry, I could do almost anything and I could make her laugh. And she had the most infectious, natural laugh. And even when I was down, I would just do something stupid, and Sherry would just giggle and laugh, and I'd get her in trouble, and and I'd get in trouble, but it was worth it because she brought so much joy to it. Yes, it was. Yeah, so I have so much love for Sherry. Thank you for that, Sherry.
Sherry, thank you for calling. You said first-time caller. We always give first-time callers a round of applause here on Nightside. So I don't know if you've ever listened before. I suspect that probably Curley. You knew Scott was going to be on, but I hope
I did. I saw his Facebook post, and I said, I was talking to another classmate. I said, I was going to call in. So I hope some others
do me
call
a
in
favor.
tonight.
Check in every once in a while. We did a lot of interesting shows up here, and we have a lot of listeners in Texas, believe it or not, who listen to us regularly. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank
All
you,
right.
sir.
Thanks again, Sherry. Love you.
Okay. Take care, Scott. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
This is great. Look, Scott, I got to take one final quick break. I do want to talk about your success, and we got a bunch of calls as well, and we'll try to get them in as well. But we'll get it all done by 11. I promise. That's what we do here every night.
All right. Sounds good.
My guest is Scott Allen Curley. The book Absolution: The Dark Path to Life. This is one I think you want to get, folks. Okay, I believe in this gentleman, and I hope you can hear in his voice the ring of truth and integrity. And he has been there and got back, and not many people do that. But he set an example. We'll be back on Nightside. We got a couple of lines open: 617-931-1030, 617-254-1030. Coming right back on Nightside.
Now back to Dan Ray, live from the Window World Nightside Studios on WBZ News Radio.
Unfortunately, this hour is moving too quickly. Scott Allen Curley is my guest. Scott spent, he's 57, young man as far as I'm concerned. Spent 10 years over various periods of time in prison, and is now a self-made millionaire. His book, Absolution: The Dark Path to Light. What did you do once you got out in 2001 for the final time? What career path have you followed, which one allowed you to succeed and also allowed you to accumulate wealth?
Well, I started doing what I'd been doing all along, but I just started doing it legally. I started working in sales. So when I was out in the streets hustling and doing all the bad things, the way that I got what I wanted was by talking myself into getting people to give me what I wanted. And some people could call it being a con artist or whatever, but I did have, thanks to Annie Curley, my mother, she forced me to speak good, proper English and to be a strong communicator. And so when I got out, I had that natural skill set, and I just started using it in the professional world, and I realized pretty quickly that I had a knack for sales, and so that was my first professional type position job.
So what type of sales were you involved in?
I had the worst of worst sales jobs. I was working for a company that sold it was retention sales. Back in the day, this was in the early 2000s, they used to have these credit card enhancement programs where these credit card companies, and I feel like it was a scam. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it was, where they would have you sign up for these quote unquote programs for dental benefits and dining benefits and all that, and people would be paying for it and not know it. And then after 3 or 4 months, they would notice it on their bill, and then they would call that number on the back of the card and cuss out whoever they get on the phone. Yeah. And my job was to take that call and somehow convince them to keep the program.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so you didn't become a millionaire doing that. How'd you accumulate wealth?
Well, that was how I cut my teeth, and you know how I realized that I had a knack for sales. But then I got into tax resolution in sales, and we don't have enough time to really get into how it all happened. But but the short of it is that the conversation and having the ability to effectively communicate will open all sorts of doors for you. And
that's all I do, Scott. It's as simple as that. I just talk.
It opens so many doors, and I know we don't have much time, but to your point, when you asked how did I get to where I am and where I hope to continue to go, because I feel like I still have a lot more work to do. People tend to misunderstand and misconstrue the difference between barriers and obstacles. A barrier is something that you cannot get through. You can't penetrate it. You can't get over it. You can't get under it. You can't get around it. An obstacle, on the other hand, is something that you can get around and you can get over it. You can get through it. The problem that many of us are, let me rephrase that. The challenge that many of us face is that we confuse barriers with obstacles. In many cases, some of us, we're all guilty of it. will encounter a difficult situation, and we will perceive it as being a barrier, and in many cases we'll stop trying to push forward. But in most cases, that perceived barrier is actually just an obstacle. The world in general is filled with obstacles. There's one obstacle after another, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of barriers, though. There are a lot of perceived barriers.
Well,
those perceived barriers are actually not barriers. They're just obstacles.
That is a great philosophy. I got a couple more calls I want to get in. One is from Houston. We're going to take first Leanne, who's calling from Massachusetts, Attleboro, Massachusetts. Leanne, I know you've been waiting a little bit, but I'll ask you to be quick so we can get one more person in from Houston. Go ahead, Leanne.
Hello. Good to talk to you, Dan and Scott. First, Scott, thank you for being the inspiration that you are, both to the incarcerated and those on the outside, because success stories such as yours are few and far between, as you know. I have a question about the title of your book, Absolution, The Dark Path to Light. Since absolution means forgiveness of sins, I'm curious as to whether you attribute any of your success and soundness of mind to a faith-based experience or a relationship with God or anything like that.
All right. Go ahead, Scott.
All of the above. There's no way that I could ever be where I am now if I weren't, A, able to forgive myself, and B, able to forgive the people that hurt me. And so that is the short answer to that question. Carrying that burden of non-forgiveness is very, very heavy. It's very heavy and it'll weigh you down. And so when I was able to forgive myself, first of all, and then forgive others who harmed me, and I pray that they forgive and ask for forgiveness, that they of me as well, then that paved the way for me to be able to do all sorts of wonderful things.
Leanne, great question. I want to get one more in. Thanks, Leanne. That's an excellent question, and I should have thought of that one myself. Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Good night.
All right, let me go back to Houston. Keith is in Houston. Keith, you are on with Scott Allen Curley. Go right ahead on WBZ in Boston, Keith. Go right ahead.
Hey, Dan. You're from one of my favorite cities. I'm from Texas. I grew up with Scott. I just wanted to pass along something real quick. We're longtime friends.
Yes, we are.
His story is real, and I remember going to his house and hanging out with his parents, Lester and Annie Curley. And what was interesting was, now that I think back on it, how accommodating and loving they were to the friends and me, and they welcomed us, wanted us to hang out. She would ask me if she could cook me anything, and it was a long, long time before I realized, and me and Scott talked, and he confided in me different things that had happened in his life that I didn't even know back at that time. So my point is that you never know what people are going through. It's easy to make a judgment about a family or people and friends or whoever it may be, but you really don't know a lot of times. And Scott's story, it took until me and him were in our 50s to finally reveal and tell me about a lot of this. So it's just an interesting part of life, and it's taught me life lessons up until this day. And Scott's story is part of that. And even though I knew his family well, I thought I did. We hung out together and did a lot of things together and had a lot of life experiences together, but you never know really what people are going through.
Absolutely.
And,
Keith, I'm flat out of time, so I got to let you go, but I hope you'll continue to listen to my show. We do a variety of issues up here, and I think you have a better sense of what this show is all about having listened tonight. Thank you for listening.
I got you, Dan. Thank you.
All right, Keith.
I got it.
Thank you, Keith.
Thanks, Dan.
Scott Allen Curley, a great hour. Absolution, The Dark Path to Light. The book is available, and Amazon, I assume, everywhere, right?
Amazon, you can buy it in Barnes & Noble. Go to anywhere books are sold, either online or in stores. You can find it. If it's not in the bookstore itself, just go to the front counter and they can order it for you, have it for you the next day.
Sounds great. Scott Allen Curley, I hope to meet you someday. If I get down your way or you get up this way, you are an inspiration. And I feel I know you after having spent an hour with you, and you're an extraordinary person. Thank you so much for being.
I
with
really
us today.
appreciate you, Dan. You have a wonderful rest of your evening, and to your listeners, I thank them all, and God bless all of you.